At the Far East Tribunal in 1945, a furious Japanese officer demanded of the American prosecutor, "Haven't you heard of Perry? Don't you know our own country's history? You might say we became your disciples. Why don't you subpoena Perry from the afterlife and try him as a war criminal?" This Japanese, lambasting the Americans, was Ishiwara Kanji, reputedly the Imperial Japanese Army's most brilliant officer. When considering Imperial Japanese Army officers and generals, Americans often recall Yamashita Tomoyuki, who masterminded an Oriental blitzkrieg using bicycles, earning the moniker Tiger of Malaya, or perhaps the respected opponent, Hitoshi Yamamura, who enforced strict military discipline, prohibiting excessive violence and rape, and showed respect for local populations, or Tsuji Masanobu, who continuously attacked Henderson Airfield in Guadalcanal campaign, or Mutaguchi Renya, who forced his starving soldiers to eat grass amid supply shortages, even declaring, "Japanese have been eating grass since ancient times." His actions led his own men to brand him Kichiku General, which means Ghost Beast, after he starved tens of thousands of Japanese troops. Today, however, Ishiwara Kanji remains less familiar to Americans. He had been effectively sidelined by the Imperial Japanese Army's Corps and relegated to the reserves before Japan declared war to the United States. Yet the Chinese people will never forget him, for he was among the key Japanese generals who orchestrated the Mukden incident, known in Japan as the Shina incident, and the subsequent invasion of northeast China. The Japanese won't forget him because he confronted Tojo and indirectly changed Imperial Japan's future. In this video, I'll briefly discuss Ishiwara Kanji's life and delve into one of his most influential work, Final War Theory. Attention, because this is a very controversial figure, so I won't dive into him and his works deeply, only providing a description as concise and objective as possible. Please open the subtitle for better comprehension. Disclaimer: I do not support imperialism and fascism. I fully respect Chinese people, Japanese people, and peoples who got harmed during World War II. This video is for educational purpose only. Do not use this video to spread misleading information and hatred. I'm not a native Japanese and English speaker. There might be some wrong pronunciation, and if there's any mistakes and invalid information in this video, please note in the comment section. Thank you. The reason why I choose to investigate Ishiwara Kanji is because he was quite important to the Second Sino-Japanese War and to the Chinese people, which including myself. But such an important figure isn't being described and discussed in public education in mainland China. At least it didn't being mentioned in junior high school in China. I don't know if it's being mentioned in high school in China because I went to an international high school, although still in China. But I no longer use the textbooks published by the Chinese Education Bureau, so I'm not sure if the public high school in China and higher level Chinese educational institutions have discussed Ishiwara Kanji in detail. If I'm wrong in the above statement, please let the viewers who understand the Chinese education system correct me in the comment section in time. Thank you. I don't think the hidden history should be left unexplored and untaught. Just like Quentin Skinner, a British intellectual, said, "Powerful rulers and shapers of opinion will always have an interest in ensuring that certain stories are remembered and remembered in certain ways, while other stories are forgotten. If so, one of the moral importance of historical study may be said to lie in the fact that historians are prepared to engage with such stories and to subject them to critical scrutiny. Their role is to, in effect, to bear witness, thereby helping to ensure that the stories that define and sustain us are imposed upon us as little as possible, so that particular groups ordeals are not misleadingly glorified, or misleadingly stigmatized, or simply unjustly written out of the record. That's precisely why, although Ishiwara fails to command widespread popularity, I remain intent to discussing him. On January 18, 1889, Ishiwara Kanji was born in Tsuruoka City. As a teenager, his temperament was notably rough. On one occasion, his sister arrived at school to find him causing an uproar in the classroom. Despite this, Ishiwara consistently ranked at the very top of his grade. By third grade, he excelled remarkably in reading, mathematics, and composition. He developed a keen passion for studying World War history and philosophy. Around this same period, he began delving into books related to Nichiren Lotus Sutra. In December 1907, he gained entry into the prestigious 21st class of the Imperial Japanese Army Academy. Within its classroom and study halls, Ishiwara immersed himself into military text. On rest days, he frequently retreated to the library, absorbing works on war history, philosophy, and sociology. His academic performance placed him third among 350 cadets. However, his occasional resistance and insults directed at his platoon leader resulted in conduct deductions, ultimately lowering his graduation standing to sixth place in 1909. Throughout these formative years, Pan-Asian ideology profoundly shaped Ishiwara's thoughts. In 1920, Ishiwara was dispatched to serve at the commander's office of the Chinese Expeditionary Force in Hankou, China. There, he witnessed firsthand the fierce clashes of the 1920 war between northern warlords, starkly contrasting them with the Russo-Japanese War. He realized that bribery and propaganda held far greater strategic value than open-armed battles. Reflecting this insight in his book History of War, he detailed how his Hankou tenure crystallized his concept of dividing wars into two distinct types: decisive wars and protracted wars, a cornerstone of his later final war theory. During this same period, he pursued undercover investigations with intense fervor, disguised at once as a porter hauling a heavy load. He infiltrated the docks and lived among the laborers for over half a month. Midway through his dangerous mission, Republic of China police force stripped him naked and seized his last coin, leaving him perilously close to death. These gritty experiences granted Ishiwara a profound understanding of China's lower classes and revealed the brutal, grasping nature of its warlords. The confident smile he wore later and his pivotal role in initiating the Mukden incident were deeply rooted in these formative encounters. From 1922 to 1925, Ishiwara Kanji was sent to study in Germany. In Germany, he came into contact with the latest military theories of that time, and based on this, he conducted research on military history from ancient times to modern times. This enabled him to make new breakthroughs in his thoughts that originated from his understanding of the Russo-Japanese War and his experience of the Chinese warlords' conflicts, and gave him a new understanding of the development of war. In October 1928, Ishiwara was assigned to become the staff officer of the Kwantung Army in Manchuria, began to plot a plan for an armed invasion of northeast China. The Mukden incident broke out in 1931. Less than 1,000 troops of the Kwantung Army occupied Shenyang, and tens of thousands of the Chinese Northeast Army were disarmed. In the following few months, the Kwantung Army occupied the entire northeast region. The best later, due to various factors, Japan could only control the northeast by establishing the puppet Manchukuo. However, the initial goal of Ishiwara's plan had been achieved, and the problem of Japan's lack of strategic depth has been somewhat improved. In 1932, as the victorious general returning home, Ishiwara was awarded a medal and began to implement his next plan. In August 1935, he entered the central authority of the military, the General Staff Department, and was promoted to the rank of Major General in March 1937. By the 1930s, Ishiwara had published his seminal work, The Final War Theory, marking the zenith of his political and military thought. Tragically for him, he was sidelined by the Imperial Japanese Army, primarily due to his vehement opposition against waging total war against China. During his service with the Kwantung Army, he accidentally impaled himself with his own sword in the groin, suffering a urethral tear. This traumatic incident inflicted years of chronic suffering and laid the grim foundation of his later bladder cancer. Records indicate Ishiwara endured persistent blood in his urine following the injury and eventually succumbed to bladder cancer on August 15, 1949, at the age of 60. This overview of Ishiwara Kanji himself leads me to delve into his Final War theory. The version I'm reading was published in 1941 by the East Asia Alliance Guangzhou branch. Guangzhou is a city under Japanese occupation since 1938. Originally published in Japanese, this specific text I hold is rendered into traditional Chinese. I'll translate and explain in English to reveal the core narrative and concepts of the work. Please note that potential inaccuracies may arise during this process. In the first part of his Final War theory, Ishiwara explored the dual nature of the war. He argued that conflicts fundamentally divided into decisive wars and protracted wars. Their forms shaped by historical context and the prevailing value of military power. He outlined the evolution of warfare, noting that in ancient times, such as Rome and China's Zhou dynasty, wars were typically decisive, mobilizing entire nations. This stemmed from limited military technology advancements. Lacking absolute superiority, victory often depended on numerical advantage, leading armies to organize into massive formations. For the Middle Ages, Ishiwara highlighted a key shift. Nations bound together primarily by religion. Advancing to the age of firearms, warfare transformed into protracted struggles. Conscription evolved from entire nation in arms toward mercenary forces, and the fundamental army unit shrank to the locus. This era witnessed the rise of new nations, particularly across Europe. Following the French Revolution in 1789, conscription reverted to entire nation in arms, and war regained its decisive character. The basic unit became the skirmisher squad, coinciding with the emergence of nationalism. Um, since the first European campaign, a designation he employed for World War I as the concept of a world war did not exist when he published his work in 1940, warfare reverted once more to the protracted form. Based on his observations of the World War I European battlefields, the core army unit diminished further to small teams, and nations formed opposing leagues. Looking ahead, Ishiwara predicted an universal participation in warfare. All citizens, men, women, children, and the elderly, would contribute to diverse roles. The fundamental unit of the army would ultimately become the individual soldier, heralding the unification of the world. In his final war theory, Ishiwara further glorified the Second Sino-Japanese War as a holy war, proclaiming its purpose was to establish a new East Asian order. He emphasizes its so-called moral righteousness, particularly the principle of not demanding compensation. Simultaneously, he denounced Japan's historical approach of disregarding other ethnic groups, instead fervently advocating for the creation of an East Asian alliance to achieve ethnic harmony. He also declared that forming this East Asian alliance and integrating East Asia's resources to confront the West constituted the very core of the Showa reform. Ishiwara predicted that the future would further exist in a state of perpetual conflict between the East Asian alliance, obviously led by Japan, and the American group, dominated by the United States across the Pacific. This monumental battle would determine the trajectory of human civilization, pitting the East Asian ideal of benevolent rule against the Western paradigm of domineering rule. Ishihara firmly believed that the ultimate war would hinge on devastating weapons, such as long-range air forces, deciding the outcome within an astonishingly short time frame. He predicted that within less than a century, aircraft capable of soaring above the atmosphere would emerge, refueling only a few times to circumnavigate the globe. Furthermore, he foresaw weapons on the plane are capable of annihilating entire cities and claiming millions of lives. Ishiwara further asserted that achieving such technological advancement should demand an industrial revolution in the near future. Here, he specifically underscored the pre-war industrial construction of Germany's Third Reich. Indeed, throughout his text, he repeatedly lavished the praise on Germany's history and contemporary policies, revering and consistently invoking in German military experts and generals like Moltke, Frederick II, and Schlieffen. Expressing deep-seated reverence for German military theory, this perspective likely stemmed from his period of study in Germany, which left him profoundly acquainted with the nation. Perhaps since the Franco-Prussian War, Germany's title as the world's most powerful army had burned itself into the consciousness of strategists across Eurasia. It is also possible that shortly before he published this book, Germany's stunningly successful blitzkrieg against Poland and France significantly galvanized his conviction of this nation. To achieve his envisioned industrial revolution, which this video highlighted earlier, Ishiwara Kanji believed until uniting all of Asia was the critical first step, necessitating the occupation of China and Southeast Asia. As described here, he actively defended the Second Sino-Japanese War, also previously mentioned, arguing that European technology vastly surpassed Asia's. He envisioned Manchuria, China, and Southeast Asia supplying essential labor and resources. In return, Japan would provide technological modernization, forging a mutually beneficial arrangement designed to ultimately achieve Asia's industrial revolution. We've noted that Ishiwara was deeply inspired by Nichiren Buddhist thought, rooted in Japanese Mahayana traditions. Essentially, his final war theory framed a vision of holy war, merging Nichiren ideals with Pan-Asian ideology to confront the West, specifically the United States. Within this final war theory, he expressed the sense of predestined inevitability drawn from Nichiren Buddhist thought, which holds that Sakyamuni Buddha died around 550 BCE, and that 2,500 years later, the world will be unified. Nichiren prophesied following this world war, Japan would establish a Bodhimanda for Buddhism. The teaching would then return from Japan to India, shining forth in the final times. Consequently, Ishiwara's ideology was profoundly shaped by his religious convictions. Through his eyes, this ultimate clash between Eastern and Western civilizations representing a fair confrontation, the ultimate test of ideals. Therefore, he believes that even if the world's population were slashed by half, this would never be a war of hatred. Instead, it would stand as a sacred clash of ideals, much like honorable material arts masters squashing off with mutual respect. The formation of this war unfolded through three distinct stages for Japan. First, eliminate Soviet forces in the Far East and exploit the resources of Manchukuo and North China by military preparations. Next, drive the British from Asia, seize the Australian and New Zealand regions, all while in maintaining peace with the United States. Finally, in the late 20th century, wage a decisive final war against the United States to establish the East Asian Alliance, resting upon the pillars of Japan, Manchukuo, and China. This is the entire content of Ishiwara's final war theory. Let's analyze Ishiwara's ideology and final war theory. First, we must recognize that Ishiwara Kanji was not the sole Pan-Asianist of that era. Figures like Kagesa Sadaki, Inukai Takeru, and even Wang Jingwei, the puppet governor of Japan in China, also embraced this ideology. Notably, however, these so-called Pan-Asianists championed distinctly pro-Japanese ideologies and materialistic doctrines, starkly contrasting with Sun Yat-sen's vision of Pan-Asianism. Notably, many of these genuine Pan-Asianists received only meager compensation from the Japanese government. Some even faced personal repercussions precisely because they refused to endorse the hardline policies of the Japanese military. This climate of neglect and punishment ultimately contributed to the failure of Ishiwara's plan and even led to his exclusion from the center of the Imperial Japanese Army. To further analyze Ishiwara's ideas, it's important to understand Nichiren Buddhism in modern Japan. Modern Nichiren Buddhism in Japan unfolded through three distinct waves. The first generation, typically born in the 1860s to 1870s, championed the state theory, which is kokutai in Japanese, and sought to weave the Avatamsaka Sutra seamlessly into the fabric of Japanese mythology. Born in the 1880s and 1890s, the second generation passionately advocated for the diversification of ideas. Remarkably, some socialists even blended Nichiren Buddhism with socialist thoughts. The third wave, comprising figures like Ishiwara born in the 1900s and 1910s, exhibited a pronounced tendency towards direct, often aggressive action, such as invasion. Nichiren Buddhism actually spread to Taiwan, Korea, and even mainland China through conquest. Nichiren Buddhism's dissemination was particularly evident during Japan's colonial expansion in the early 20th century, where it was actively promoted by the state-sponsored initiatives to legitimize occupation and foster cultural assimilation among subjected populations. This process involved the establishment of temples and schools, coupled with propaganda campaigns that framed the faith as integral to Japan's imperial mission. But Ishiwara's Nichiren-inspired plan to conquer the world has profoundly unrealistic. Given the overwhelming complexity of global religious systems, even East Asia's intricate religious landscape rendered his goal unattainable. Ishiwara's final war theory offers startlingly prescient insights, even daring predictions concerning modern warfare after World War II. Yet critics rightly emphasize that such simplistic linear extrapolation lies within almost everyone's grasp. For instance, his forecast of aircraft circumnavigating the globe without multiple refutings, and even the Soviet Union's collapse, resembles little more than a child's assertion that humans could someday build Star Wars Death Star, given an infinite time span, noting lies beyond humanity's eventual grasp. The reason why Ishiwara's final war theory failed to materialize, at least thus far, and his grand design for Asia failed to achieve its aims, remains multifaceted. Nonetheless, there are some key factors that are widely accepted today. First, Ishiwara ought to have grasped sooner than that drastically slashing military expeditions to pour substantial capital into expanding Japan's heavy industry was imperative. Yet, this vital strategy faced doubting obstacles, encountering stiff resistance from within the military ranks themselves. Second, the persuasiveness of Ishiwara Kanji's ideas remains questionable. His complex and often overly ambitious worldview proved difficult to grasp, failing to resonate widely even within Japan, and previously noted, presenting these intricate thoughts to outsiders such as ordinary Chinese people in Manchuria raises profound skepticism about their actual comprehension or acceptance. Thirdly, Ishiwara's personal character proved highly problematic. His outright refusal to seek a consensus, his imposition of top-down decisions, and his tendency to directly confront superiors and colleagues, often displaying outright insulting attitudes towards them, significantly contributed to the fierce opposition he encountered within the army. If he couldn't prevail upon the Japanese army, how could he ever hope to sway the entire Japan and Asia as a whole? In Ishiwara's final war theory has no contribution to shape the modernity in 21st century? Well, I don't think so. Ishiwara indeed predicted that the war is gradually shifting towards smaller military units. This is due to the advancement of communication technology, which has made individual combat feasible. But at the same time, Ishiwara's over-reliance on weapons and tactical innovations, while neglecting international politics, and moral constraints. This is a warning against the current militaristic mindset. His ultimate confrontation between the East and West framework is essentially a continuation of colonial logic, reducing diverse civilizations to a binary confrontation. In the era of globalization, which, at least for now, this kind of thinking has been disproved. The Sino-US cooperations demonstrates that the form of competition has shifted from civilizations warfare to competition based on rule systems. If you look at the recent news about the Chinese and US government, you might think that their manifesto and declaration are a bit interesting because there's many there are many behind scenes trades, like many sort of deals like that. Well, back to the video. Where am I now? Ishiwara fantasized about achieving permanent peace after the final war, but modern peace relies on institutional constraints, such as the United Nations and the nuclear non-proliferation system, rather than violent unification. The counter example of his theory precisely proves that peace is the outcome of dynamic governance and rather than the end of war. Regarding his predictions, one cannot dismiss them merely as linear historical facts, such as technological innovations and industrial revolutions of the 20th century, instead viewed through the lens of events that have unfolded the continual shape of our world. His foresight remains remarkably prescient. This includes the immense investment in technology humanity undertook during the later half of the 20th century and the early 21st century, emphasize Air Force and destructive weapon, which now achieve being the atomic bomb, which ironically, this destructive weapon he dreamed that Japan could have was actually dropped in Japan. And the decline of old colonialist powers like the United Kingdom and the United States ascent as a dominant industrial nation within the post-World War global order. Well, these are the factors that he pretty much oversaw the process. Ishiwara's theory is like a prism. On one side, a prism. On one side, it reflects keen insight into technology, economy, and the forms of warfare. On the other side, it exposes militarism's arrogance, and disregard for human nature. This is why I consider him as a worthy subject of study, not only as a soldier but also a smart opponent. As the saying goes, a treacherous friend proves far more treacherous to navigate than a sincere enemy. In our current era of volatile and ever-shifting global dynamics, strategically brilliant military and political figures like Ishiwara, whose meticulously crafted doctrines command formidable theoretical backing, are precisely what the nation requires. Thank you for your time, and Metal Wong. If history, music, toys, and film cameras spark your interest, please stay tuned. I'm also currently delving deep into the Russo-Japanese War. If you're curious about it, check out on my vlog on Port Arthur and the mysterious material I bought about the Russo-Japanese War, and explore my other videos. Well, see you soon!